When the United States needs more money than it has, the U.S. Treasury will raise that money by issuing securities, which are basically a promise that if you give us money now, we'll pay you back plus some interest in the future. In other words, debt. Most of our debt is owned domestically, but some of it is owned by foreigners and even other countries. This is called our public debt, which is currently around $10 trillion and growing. Now there's another $5 trillion of debt that the U.S. owes itself. You see, when the U.S. collects revenue for specific programs like Social Security that it will need for later, it doesn't save or invest that money. Instead, it gives that money towards other budget items, and we just promise to pay that money back in the future for the rightful program. If you add up the public and intergovernmental debt, you get what's called the gross public debt. Now, the trillion-dollar question is how much debt is too much? And interestingly, the best way to answer that question isn't just to add up all the debt and say, dang, that's a big number, but instead to compare it to our gross domestic product. So, what's that? Well, you get the gross domestic product of a country by adding up all the goods and services produced in that country each year. Now, when GDP grows, it means our economy is growing and we're creating more jobs and more tax revenue. So economists like to look at debt by comparing it to GDP, and that gives you a percentage. Now, you can look at the percentage of debt to GDP over the course of US history, and you'll find that since 2001, our debt to GDP ratio has been rapidly growing and shows little signs of stopping. So the real question is how much debt to GDP is too much? Recently, a team of economists performed a comprehensive study looking at this very question. The study found that with anything below 90% debt to GDP, there was no observable effect on the country's economic growth. But when a country gets above 90%, suddenly the economy begins to suffer. Currently, the US is somewhere above 100% debt to GDP. And these same economists have concluded that our current debt trajectories are a risk to our long-term growth and stability as a country. So almost everyone agrees that we have to solve this debt problem. But the question is, when do we solve it